In this lesson, we will create an application using Redux Toolkit. So in the previous lesson, we created this application using core Redux, where on every refresh of the page, we get a list of 10 random users. To achieve that, we use just the core Redux package. Now, we will learn how to use Redux Toolkit to achieve the same. To create a new Redux Toolkit project, we can run npm init and it will ask a couple of questions. Say yes for this. Now, for project name, you can give Redux Toolkit Basics. Select React for Framework and JavaScript for Variant. Now, change directory to Redux Toolkit Basics. Let's open the folder in Visual Studio Code now. And once the project is created, we need to install the packages from package.json file. You can execute just yarn or yarn install, or if you prefer npm, you can use npm install command to install the packages. It will install all the packages mentioned in the dependencies section. And now, you can execute yarn dev command to start the application. You can also use npm run dev command instead of yarn dev if you want. This is the default page created using Vite. And now, we will go to app.jsx file and remove the unnecessary code. Now, we will copy all the CSS from our previous project. Let's copy index.css file. Now, we'll do the same for app.css file. So the UI will look the same. Now, we will create a Redux folder. And when using Redux Toolkit, it's a convention to create a features folder, and inside that, we add our Redux code. Each part of the application, like profile information or user information, can be handled as a part of features folder. And inside this folder, you can create a user-slice.js file as we're displaying list of users. In the Redux folder, we can create store folder, and inside that create store.js file. Right now, we don't have any Redux-specific packages installed. So let's install them first, using yarn add Redux, and then React Redux. For Redux Toolkit, we need to install at Redux.js/toolkit package. If you search for at Redux.js Toolkit, you can see npm package at Redux.js Toolkit. So this is the package we need to install. We can also install Axios package. Previously, to create store we have to use create store function. But with Redux Toolkit, we can use configure store function from Redux Toolkit package. It's a wrapper around create store function which makes it easy to create and handle store. Now, we can declare const store equal to configure store. And this configure store accepts a list of options. Always press Ctrl+space so you will get autocomplete suggestions and you will not make typos. We can declare a reducer here. To assign a value, we first need to create our reducer. When using Redux Toolkit, you don't create reducer yourself. If you check the core Redux code, you can see we created users reducer.js file. It contains a reducer function which accepts state and action. But with Redux Toolkit, inside users slice we can create a slice which will help us to handle reducer code. So first import create slice from Redux Toolkit. Whenever doing import, just add curly brackets first and then complete the statement. So you will get autocomplete suggestions. Let's say const users slice equal to create slice. It also accepts a list of options. And if you do Ctrl plus space, you get list of available options. So, first we will give name to the slice. Let's name it users, as we're dealing with users. And next option is initial state. The initial state will be the same, is loading false, is error false, and data is empty. So this is the initial state. And now the next option is reducers. Make sure you're using autocomplete suggestion, as the property is reducers and not reducer. In store, it's reducer and not reducers. And in this case, it's reducers. Now, inside reducers, we can define list of action creator functions. Here, we can define getUsersRequest function, which will take state and action. And here, whenever a request comes, we need to update the isLoading property value. State.isLoading equal to true. Now, similarly get user success. State in action. If you check the core Redux code, you can see that, from the reducer, we're returning a new state for every action. And we're not mutating the state, which is important to understand as reducer is a pure function. And in reducer, we don't modify the original state, instead we return a new state. But in Redux Toolkit code, you can see, I have directly modified the state. This is allowed because, when we use createSlice method, it behind the scenes uses the Immer library. So it uses the Immer.js library. When using this library, even though it looks like we're changing the state, we're actually changing the copy of state which Immer.js handles behind the scenes. So modifying the state is only allowed when we're inside the createSlice method. So Redux Toolkit makes it really easy to change the state. Even if we have a nested state, then instead of manually spreading out all the properties and then changing the required property, we can directly change any of the property. So here, we're directly updating the isLoading property. And when it's success, isLoading will be false. Iserror will be false. And data will be action.payload. Now, in getUsersError function, I can use normal function syntax also, instead of arrow function. It will also receive state and action. And in this case, isLoading will be false. And isError will be true. So you can use either arrow function syntax or a normal function syntax. Now, these are your action creator functions. If you check the core Redux code, you can see you manually need to create these action creator functions to dispatch an action. But in case of Redux Toolkit, These automatically become your action creator functions. So let's print this user's slice. Now, we will use destructuring. And as you can see inside the user's slice object, we have a list of actions and other things. From the actions, we can destructure the available action creator functions. Get user's request, get user's success, and get user's error. The user slice also provides a reducer that we can export default, which is the actual reducer we can use in the configure store function. We will export this also, but as a named export. Now, in store.js, we can use the exported reducer. We can call it users. And let's import the reducer. So the reducer we're exporting as a default export. That's why we're able to import it without curly brackets. Now, we can assign it to users. We can export the store now as a default export. And we can use the exported store for the provider component from React Redux package. So this store we're exporting and importing it in main.jsx file. Now, our application is connected to the Redux store. Now, let's access the store data from app.jsx file using useSelector hook. In the case of the core Redux code, our store was directly using the uses reducer. That's why in useSelector, we were directly referencing state. But now, in Redux Toolkit code, the store is an object with users as a key. So while accessing the state, it should be state.users. So this users property refers to the users from store. If you change it to something else, let's say profile, then this will be state profile. So the state.users refers to store users property and not slice name property. Now, let's access the properties from the user's store. As you can see, the user slice has isLoading, isError, and data properties. So let's destructure them. Now, we will just display the data coming from store. Right now, we don't have any users. So as you can see, the data is empty. So, let's add a useEffect hook. We will execute this only once when the component is mounted. To save time, we can copy-paste the core Redux code here. Now, let's import Axios. So let's add it using useDispatch hook. Regarding this get users request, we already have it. If you check the users slice, you can see we have get users request, get users success, and get users error action creator functions. So let's import them one by one. So all of these are imported. Now, let's check the application. As you can see, initially data is empty and then we get a list of 10 random users. If we check the Redux Dev Tools, as you can see, we're able to see the actions dispatched here. So all the actions and stored data is getting displayed here. With Redux Toolkit, you don't need to configure Redux Toolkit to see the data. Because we're using configure store function for creating the store, this configuration is automatically provided. If you check the core Redux code, you can see we had to add this line to see the data in DevTools. But with Redux Toolkit, you don't need to configure anything to see the data. So, now we have this data coming from the API. Let's display it on the UI. So let's copy the same code of core Redux to save some time. Now, let's create the user component. So inside the components folder, create users.jsx file. And let's copy the contents from here. Now, we can import the component. So the users component is imported here. Now, let's check the application. We're getting the error, users is not defined. Let's check the code. So we're destructuring the data property, which is defined in the users slice. But while using map method, we're using users. So let's use renaming syntax to rename data to users. Now, if you check the application, you can see that we're able to see the list of users. Let's check the Redux store. As you can see, it's also getting populated correctly. If you see the action name, you can see it's users/getUsersRequest. So the initial user's name is coming from the name we have given in the users slice.js file. If I add an extra s here, you can see that it's reflected in the action name. So as you can see, the name given to the slice is used to identify the actions. So it's easy to distinguish different actions. So with this, we're done with this application created using Redux Toolkit.